listening to the Arsenal Therapy Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the 15-minute show, part of the Arsenal Therapy Podcast. I'm joined again by a very special guest in the form of Will Balsam. Will, can you tell everyone a bit about yourself and where they can find you?
Definitely. Will Balsam on Twitter. Used to be HaleEndProductions, as I'm sure many of you probably remember that handle. Just changed the name. But yeah, I'm covering all things Hale End from across the pond here and, keeping everyone up to date on the best and most interesting academy prospects at Arsenal.
Yeah, well, today we're going to pick your brains on some of the academy prospects coming through, who to watch, who we should really be paying attention to, some of the players that have left that maybe didn't make it, and what to expect going forward from Hale End and how this continues to grow as an operation. We have already done a show on Max Dowman, so we won't be focusing on Max today, but we will be more picking your brains on some of the ones that maybe don't get the attention. So first up, that's exactly where I'm going to start. Who should we be watching this season coming through Hale End?
Definitely. I think there's a couple of really exciting attacking names that people may or may not be familiar with. Anous is one center forward who kind of converted center forward from out wide player who's made some big strides this year, getting his first under-21 action. Lewis-Skelly, a very, very talented, young, electrifying winger. Brando Bailey-Joseph, another one, just turned 16 years old, who will be one that the club will probably start platforming pretty soon. And then some other names that have, kind of been around. Braden Clark is an interesting defender who kind of in the Ben White mold. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more. And Ife Ibrahim, a very exciting midfielder. I mean, there is a ton more to talk about as well, but those are some that I'm definitely keeping my eye on over the next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Anous as well has just got his first England under-18s cap tonight. So it's a very good time that we are recording, although the show will go out at a slightly later day. But yeah, there's huge talent coming through at under-16 level, under-18, and in the 21 level. So I guess first up, you mentioned attackers. That's something we've been very good at producing wingers, midfielders, but we haven't produced many like real attackers in the form of, I guess, goal scorers. So talk to me about that first off.
Well, it's funny we say that, but yet we have Mika Biereth, who's been, I guess we didn't produce him, brought him from Fulham, but he definitely had some of his most important moments, both at the academy and on loan from Arsenal. And of course, now really been spectacular for Monaco, where he took the place of Folarin Balogun, who had a great year at Reims, half decent first year at Monaco, then hurt by injury this year. And we have kind of developed some attackers. Even Eddie Nketiah won an FA Cup this year, sold him for a pretty penny. It's interesting because at this level that Arsenal have risen to, it's so hard to be a striker coming through an academy. Even look at the likes of Man City, like Liam Delap. Never really got the chance to get that opportunity at Manchester City. He's going to go to Chelsea this summer and, be playing in the Champions League next year. It's just a harder, probably the most difficult position to truly make it through if you're a club challenging for the Premier League and Champions League on a year-to-year basis. But I do think Arsenal are going to be making a big stride towards kind of configuring that striker room at the academy. There was a bit of a lull with Keon Edwards where it felt like he was kind of the next one pushing behind Balogun and Biereth, but between injuries and a little bit of inconsistency, unfortunately, his form fell off a bit. But Anous, that's a very exciting attacker who has a lot of really good athletic and natural abilities alongside an innate finishing brain in the way that he scores goals.
Yeah, well, Anous is someone who he kind of took that mantle from Chido Martin, who obviously went to United. There were comparisons throughout the season of the two of them. They are very, very different players, very differently built and everything. Talk to me about him specifically and what you like about him and a bit about the profile of the player for those who don't know.
Definitely. Anous started more as a winger in kind of his pre-16 and under 18 days. He was really a left winger who liked to receive out wide and was really good isolated in 1v1s. Just really, really smart, strong, springy player, able to dribble around players. But over the last 18 months or so, they kind of converted him to a center forward because he does like to drop deep. He does like to get involved and build up play and has an ability to really play with his back to goal in that first couple of phases of build up and hold defenders off and then kind of spin and make runs in behind. The thing about Anous that I am really not shocked by, but pleasantly surprised by in the last year is the way that he's able to finish and get into the right areas for a player who didn't necessarily grow up as a number 9. He really developed great finishing instincts. If you catch his goal from the PSG under-19 match or his goal in the Papa John's Trophy as well, they're both like kind of weird finishes where he kind of reacts and gets his head on one, and one time he just kind of gets his toe on a rebound and puts it in. They don't look like anything special, but those type of goals are the exact type of goals I feel that we've been missing in the first team for a long time. Like, I think I'm a big fan of Kai Havertz, but I wouldn't call him an instinctual finisher by any means. And to start developing more instinctual finishers, I think, is a big step for Arsenal. And not to keep talking about Mika Biereth, but that's actually something about Mika Biereth that I really think we misjudged with him at the academy. He obviously was so technically skilled, great in the channels, really good at actually carrying the ball, but he developed great instincts, both on loan at Motherwell and Sturm Graz. And that's the thing that's made him super special at Monaco, is the ability to kind of be at the end of loose balls and poking balls. I mean, you don't score 2 hat-tricks in your first 4 matches in one of Europe's top 5 leagues by scoring spectacular goals every time. You do it by being in the right place at the right time. And that's a level of Andre Anous' game that he's really taken up a notch. And I'm excited to see him do that as the main striker next year for the under-21s.
Yeah, well, it's interesting with Cheeto because I always felt that Cheeto was like the biggest kid in the playground. I never felt that he had to show his physical qualities to score goals. He was just able to run at 3/4 pace and beat players because he was just faster than them. He was stronger than them. Even his ball striking and his finishing, I never felt was overly spectacular. He didn't have to hit the corners, for example. He just seemed to be able to play that at walking pace. And I think if he was kind of hit the end of season form midway through the year, he would have been playing under 21s a lot sooner, and he might have had a pathway at Arsenal, but it wasn't to be. And there are plenty of other attacking players coming through. Chaka O'Neil is one that I've been following very closely. Being a player from Northern Ireland, we haven't had many over the years, especially ones that were actually born there. We had Daniel Ballard, although he was born in Stevenage, but Chaka is someone that's had a pretty good first season for the under-18s. He's scored goals. He's linked well with Dowman and other players in that team. And he's someone that looks to have a bright future ahead of him. So talk to me about him.
Definitely. He's really kind of stayed under the radar because of all the great other players we have who maybe are more exciting to watch in ways, but he's a really nifty player, like really pops up in little spaces in between the lines. He's actually developed a little bit more ability to receive out wide and drive at players, and he's super creative. He's not going to score the most goals in the side at any point, but even if you watch him with Northern Ireland's under-17s, he's done really well to use both feet and create with both feet. When he gets into the box, he's always looking for that kind of final killer pass, which is an element that you don't see a lot at this age. I think a lot of players are more concerned with getting in and around goal, whereas I find that Chaka O'Neil really has kind of taken his game, his intelligence to another level in the way that he plays, which really helps him. Not that he's not the most athletic player, but he uses his intelligence in areas when maybe he's not necessarily going to beat a player one-on-one, which I really like about him.
Yeah, absolutely. He is someone for Northern Ireland that is doing really well. He was playing at Linfield before he came to Arsenal. So he was playing men's football before playing academy football at Arsenal. And that is something that the standard of the league in Northern Ireland is very, very different compared to where it's at in England. But he's been someone that has constantly impressed me this season. And I think whether he is a first-team player at Arsenal or not, I think he's someone that you can develop and go on and sell. But there are plenty of others in the academy. Dan Casey is another one that does get a lot of attention. There have been Griezmann comparisons there. What are your thoughts on Casey? Because he's an interesting case because there hasn't been kind of the rumors that he's going to make the step up, despite scoring, I think, 19 goals last season.
Yeah, Dan Casey is a player I'm a huge fan of. He really reminds me of Aaron Ramsey in the way that he plays. Just always pops up around the edges of the box when that ball's bouncing around or when a player is in trouble and needs to play a cutback. Seems to be Dan Casey's there, and his first time finishing with both feet into any area of the net is superb. He's another kind of more old-fashioned player. It almost feels like the academies in England are kind of almost having, not a regression. Regression's not the right word, but going back into scouting the way that we used to scout it and turning players into more all-action midfielders instead of ones who have very specific roles. And Dan Casey really is. I mean, he can play deep in a double pivot if asked, or he can play as a false nine. He just really understands the game super well, and he's made a massive impact this year, because all of a sudden Arsenal were short of a striker for the under-18s when Shido Obi left, and Andre Anous at times made the step up to the under-21s, and as you mentioned, scored 18, 19 goals in all competitions. He also, can play a killer final pass if need to and win the ball back in midfield. I am surprised by his lack of under-21 involvement, considering what he's done over the past 18 months. I have a good feeling that he'll be an important player with the under-21s, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that the under-21s were kind of overloaded with players who were leaving on contract but still deserve to play football. So the Salah Deans, the Nathan Butler-Oyedejis, the Keon Edwards, those types of players who were Jack Henry Francis, players who were still playing with the under-21s, but never really had a chance anymore to make it at the club. And if it weren't for them, I have a feeling Dan Casey would have played quite a bit of under-21 football this year.
So do you think he's one that's going to make that step up quite quickly this season from 18s to 21s?
Most certainly. That's one that, you can call me out if I'm wrong in a couple of months, but if he's not the first name on the under-21 team sheet alongside, Anous and potentially Max Dowman, I would be very surprised.
Yeah, it's funny because the Ramsey comparison, the minute you've said that, I really see it. I was watching a comp that Kimo made the other day. He sent it over in our group, and I didn't realize that Casey had scored as many goals, but what impressed me was the variety of finishing that he had in his locker and how cleanly he strikes the ball. It's both feet, very, very clean, and he arrives very well in the way Ramsey did, and he can connect with the ball at the right time as well. So he's an exciting player to watch. And there were other players that made their debuts against Bolton earlier in the season, Josh Nichols and so on. And it feels like the time has come where Mikel's starting to integrate more academy players. Part of that, I feel, is because of the step up in quality of the academy. You mentioned players like Jack Henry Francis. When he was on loan at Sligo, he did very, very well. But again, the League of Ireland is a very, very different standard to what the Premier League is. And some would argue that Henry Francis is just a fairly average player at 21 level, never mind first team football. Kaelan Edwards. There's so many players in that group that were sitting around 21, 22 years old that were taking up a lot of minutes and almost blocking a pathway for academy players to get to the next step in the academy. But just on the point of pathways, that is something we always hear, this term pathway. I'm not a big believer in pathways, for the exceptions of your Ethan Nwaneris or your Max Dowmans or Myles Lewis-Skelly. Literally those kinds of players that you do have a very clear plan of how you're going to integrate them in the first team, because I believe that most players get an opportunity through injury or lack of form, and they either grab it or they don't. The reality is you can't make a pathway for every academy player and then still want to win trophies. But with this group that's filled with talent, where do you see Arsenal going? Is it down the loan market route where we increase their values, get their minutes, or how do they start finding minutes in the first team?
Definitely. I agree. The word pathway is often misused. It should be used for, you look at squad planning for this summer. Are we going to go spend 150 million on Florian Wirtz if we think Max Dowman's, future is taking that position in 18 months? Probably not. That's a pathway decision. But what really the question is about most academy players is how do we develop them so that they are successful players, both for themselves and for the club? And, hopefully don't keep going down this route of having 22-year-olds whose contracts are ending, playing under 21 football and leaving for free. So the big situation is there's been a little bit of a revamp at the academy level under Per Mertesacker, and they're trying to get the loan system correct because it needs to be used. A club like Arsenal, they're trying to create these relationships with Sturm Graz. They have a bit of a relationship with. We obviously saw Arthur Okonkwo go there, and then Mika Biereth, both having super successful periods at that club and now very successful careers. We know Bologna is a club that they're developing kind of more of a first-team basis for, but with the plans, hopefully, of potentially using that as another pathway or development club for loan periods. I think there's been a huge move towards trying to find that partner in the Eredivisie. That's obviously a league that is known for developing young players, and one that we've seen Chelsea and Manchester City use really, really well in terms of both helping players become successful first-team players at those two clubs, but more importantly, just increasing their value. I mean, we see City and Chelsea selling players who have 0 senior appearances for £20 million every given summer. So to me, that's the big next step here for Arsenal, is to figure that out. Not every Hale End star is going to ever play for Arsenal, and that's how it should be. You can't have that, or you're never challenging for the top. You need experience in a side, and yes, once in a while, you'll get an opportunity like Saka had, where there were injuries, the club was in turmoil, they needed a spark, they turned to him and he grabbed it. But Saka was not even the third or second or first best player of his age group at the time. He just ended up seizing an opportunity and showing that he is as good as he is. But he was in the same age group of Reiss Nelson, Emile Smith Rowe, Eddie Nketiah, all three of which were higher rated. And even Joe Willock was probably a higher rated player than Saka in his academy days. Yet Saka is the one who's the face of the club now. So the main key, so got off a little off track there, but the main key really is to figure out who's going to be that loan development manager, and from there to actually develop these relationships with specific clubs so that we can have a constant pathway of sending players out who are increasing their value and increasing their experience. Because even if it's a 19-year-old going on loan for a year and coming back with 2 years left on his contract, the ability then to extend him one more year and send him out on another successful loan gives you more time to decide what you're doing. But right now, Arsenal are unable to actually make decisions about players, and therefore their transfer values and their, honestly, player careers are dipping in form on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been a big frustration of mine, and I know many others, where we have let quality players go at the age of 21, essentially, like this group right now. There is a feeling that these players could go for 4, 5, 6, 10 million. Even those fees that are coming in, get them on loan early, get them playing. If the pathway isn't there to them playing football at Arsenal, they shouldn't be there after 20 playing 21's minutes, because we should be getting those loan moves. The other issue is contracts there, because contracts are expiring. We're not renewing them, and rightly we're not renewing them, but we are letting them run to the end, and the players' careers are stagnating. It's very clear that they're not wanted by Arsenal, and they're also taking up 21's minutes for those players at 18's and preventing them making the next step. So that is a big area of improvement for me. In terms of a loan manager, have you heard any rumours about who Arsenal are looking at or what they're looking for in a loan manager? Is it someone who's been at a club that they admire, or is it someone young that's coming in to bring in new ideas?
Well, it was Ben Napper for a while, and he went to Norwich City as their sporting director. Obviously brought Jack Wilshere there with him just a few months later. And then Sam Hayball took over at Arsenal. And he's been there now for about 18 months. And I honestly gave him the benefit of the doubt in that first 6 months where he kind of took over mid-season and it seemed like there wasn't much planning. But what happened here over the last year, it's another one where I like to give the benefit of the doubt. We had these players, Saladin Ulanamhan, Nathan Butler-Oyedeji, KM Edwards, Zayn Monlouis, all had 1 year left on their deal. And obviously, sending a player out with 1 year left on their deal on loan doesn't make much sense at all. But then you don't want to necessarily, do wrong by the players and not allow them to get the minutes that they need at this age to continue playing. And it was a bit of a tough situation for him. But this coming summer, he needs to be well ahead of the pace and dealing with these loan situations quickly. He is going to be the man in charge under Per Mertesacker. The two of them are working together, and as far as I'm concerned, Hayball still hasn't really even gotten his test run yet. Right now will be his last and only and first chance to really get it right. So the players like Mikael Rosiak, potentially Maldini Kalkuri again. You could even see the likes of Braden Clark going on loan potentially this year as well. Getting those loan spells right, finding the right clubs for them, and dealing with it before it's August 31st and the day before the window closes, that's really the key. If you look at Arsenal's loan spells over the last 3 or 4 years, the percentage of them that happen on transfer deadline day just shows how much the lack of planning has gone into it and how it's become kind of okay, now that we know we have enough senior players, we're going to send these players out. So we need to deal with not only the senior transfers early in the window, but that allows then for the youth loan options and contract extensions to get done, because a lot of the time those things will come hand in hand. We found you a loan, we have found you a loan club, and when we find you a loan club, you also will sign a 1 year extension.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of the Omari Hutchinson case there of, had we have got him a loan club sooner, who knows what would have happened. But he ended up spending a lot of time on the bench in his last season at Arsenal, didn't play a lot of football, was made promises at Chelsea, probably made the wrong move, and he could have fast-tracked his career a year earlier, but it didn't happen, and we didn't get much money for Hutchinson. Chelsea go on and sell him for 22 million after one loan spell, which it shows that Arsenal are producing quality players. It's just being able to sell them at the right time. And I don't think this is just an academy issue. This is an Arsenal issue club-wide, where we are often not ruthless enough to go and just sell someone whenever we feel their value's at that tipping point. Trossard, for example, in the first team is one of them, where you think it's probably time to move on and regenerate that position. But at the same time, we hear that he's potentially having his contract renewed. The same thing goes on at academy level, where we just don't have that ruthlessness to say, right, you know what, you're not going to make it. Let's get you on loan with the view to selling you at the end of the season. And that should be happening at 18. Some players will go on loan and really thrive and come back and surprise you. But more often than not, you know roughly where that player is going to be in 12 months. Interestingly, Braden Clark, you mentioned, has Ben White similarities. If you look at Ben White's career, he had moves to League Two, League One, and then to Leeds in the Championship. And then he went back to Brighton and started playing, had one great season, and ends up at Arsenal. So that pathway is very important in terms of the loans, and not everyone has to go straight to the Championship. Some players do have to work their way up, and Ben White was one of those. So, and another thing that's been mentioned a lot is the budget for the academy in terms of bringing more players in and actively going and trying to get those talents early. One player that's been mentioned is JJ Gabriel from Man United. And there are others out there. We lost out on Ryan McAdoo last year, but we did go in very hard for him. And there have been others that we've tried to get. Firstly, what do you see as being the plan? And secondly, how do we become the club that becomes as attractive as a Chelsea or Man City, who are known as, in recent years, being a real production factory of real talent? And even if you don't make it at those clubs, you go on and have a very good career.
Definitely. It's definitely been in the last 18 months or so, Arsenal have really explored spending a little bit more money in the academy space, and specifically one by one kind of addressing positions. So I would say about 2 years ago, we kind of looked more into the center back space. We went and got Braden Clark. That's not an area that Arsenal have ever been super strong in developing. This last summer, we went out and looked at some of the most electrifying wing talent in England. We got Kieran Thompson, Joshua Sasai from Millwall, another player who, you know, we'll see what he's made of, but still very young. But Kieran Thompson had a spectacular season for the under-16s, and is definitely going to be one to watch for the under-18s. He's still a little bit young, so I don't like to necessarily talk too much or tweet about a player of that age, but somebody next year who I'm sure will be platformed by the club a little bit more. He's been spectacular and was really strong for Arsenal in their younger age groups. And then, as you mentioned, Ryan McAdoo, Rio Nigamoa, who I struggle with pronouncing his name, but everybody knows the player at Liverpool, who Arsenal were really strong in for. And this year, we've gone out and looked in Scotland, Northern Ireland for some of the best talents there. As you mentioned already, Chaka O'Neil was a player that we signed. Corin Madden, a very talented striker from Northern Ireland, is one that we're looking at. We've spent a lot of time looking in the goalkeeper market. That's clearly one that Arteta, Mertesacker, and before Edu, now hopefully Berta, have identified as one where you can buy very cheap and with the right development and loan schedule, sell for more profit. Arthur Okonkwo was one where if it had been handled better, that was probably a goalkeeper that would have sold for 8 to 12 million pounds on a player who you spent nothing on. We've looked at it with Tommy Setford. Right now we have the likes of Kari Ranson, Jack Porter, Alexi Rojas, who is the Colombia under-20 goalkeeper, but didn't play a single competitive match this year. We just have really gone out there and identified certain areas where, number one, we think players could potentially make an impact at Arsenal in the future, and number two, by spending very little, actually increase that academy budget and then be up there with the likes of the City and the Chelsea and the United, who are maybe spending a little bit more on players that they do think will be future first-team products.
Yeah, well, just on that, Tommy Setford, Porter, two very, very good keepers at different age groups. What do you see as the journey for them? Because it feels like Porter, to make the next step up, probably relies on Setford either going into the first team or going off on loan. So where do you see these two fitting into the Arsenal journey?
Definitely. Jack Porter, I don't believe will have anything in his way as far as next season. I think he'll mostly play. I think he'll split his time between the under-21s and under-18s just because he still is so young, just 17 years old, and goalkeepers do take a little bit longer to develop. You don't so often see a 18-year-old goalkeeper all of a sudden go from 2 years ago being in the under-18s, next year under-21s, and then being a first-team goalie. It's just a position that does take a little bit longer to develop. And I'd expect Tommy Setford to maybe have to wait a little bit this summer to see what happens with our second goalkeeper option and to see what happens with Carl Hayne. There's still so much to decide in terms of who's going to be David Raya's backup. Are we going to spend big on Joan Garcia? Is it going to be maybe a small signing like a Kepa and then Tommy Setford probably stays? If you go get Joan Garcia and Tommy Setford doesn't go on loan, then this is just another complete misuse of players by Arsenal. But if you do get somebody who's maybe a little bit less trustworthy, I wouldn't be shocked to see Setford stay for the first half of the year and then maybe do a second 6 months on loan. But Setford is definitely very highly regarded, I know for sure, in the England setup, and I would imagine with the way Arsenal spent on bringing him in this past summer the same way. So I'd expect Setford to go on loan, but you may just have to wait a little bit longer on that depending on what happens with our number 2 goalkeeper situation and assuming we do make that Carl Hayne sale this summer. And then Jack Porter will play some under-21 football for sure next year, but I definitely expect him to play a fair amount of under-18s as well.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about Setford is despite being quite young, he's pretty well built. He's quite tall as well. I was at the Preston game sitting right behind the goal, so I had a very, very close look at Tommy Setford, and it was a case of he, at one point, had a Cruyff turn 10 minutes into the game inside his own box, cool as you like, and he looked very, very comfortable on the ball in that environment, in that setting with the crowd behind him. And we know Ajax valued him very, very highly, and they had a development pathway for him. They saw him as being a first-team keeper, but Arsenal did work very hard on that deal, so it would be one. I'd be disappointed if we don't create something for him. I think with Juan Garcia, for example, you have got the potential of bringing in a truly generational keeper, but I also have trouble seeing him coming in and wanting to be a number 2, given what he's had over the last 2 seasons. So I think it's very much a watch this space on those guys. But the other one is Marley Salmon, who is someone 15 years old, and he started to get hyped up. I saw people said he should be playing first team, which again, people forget how raw Saliba looked when he first arrived. If you watch those early 21s games that Saliba was playing and he got sent off in one of them, he didn't look like the player that came back from Nice or even the player that came back from Marseille the year after. So what are your thoughts on him and where does he go? Because centre-back's a different position. We talked about Maldini Kakura, and he's another very talented one, someone who's gone off on loan, but he's a big boy. And whereas Salmon, for example, playing centre-back at 15 years old, no matter how big you are, you're never going to be as physically strong as some of the strikers that you come up against. So what is the pathway for a 15-year-old centre-back, and how do you see that kind of developing, not just at Arsenal, but in a broader sense?
Definitely. It's definitely a position where you don't see as many cases of the Ethan and Myles where there's no, Ethan and Myles were never going to go on loan. That was never you talk about pathway, that was never in the plan for pathway. And honestly, most times when we talk pathway, loan is the actual word pathway doesn't usually use a loan. Max Dowman, there's a pathway for him. It does not include going on loan at any period. For Marley Salmon and most center back and defensive prospects, as you mentioned with Ben White earlier, usually there is at least a 6-month loan period where they are going to go play in the championship or somewhere where they're going to get tested more physically. Sometimes we see it in the Bundesliga. Sometimes we will see it in even smaller leagues. Sometimes we've seen it in Austria for some other clubs, the Austrian Bundesliga as well. Once in a while, you'll have a player who gets the time and freedom and it works out where they can just kind of take the step up to under 21. Then the next year, they'll play, if they're in the youth league or they'll play maybe in a conference league or a Europa League, if that works. Sometimes those are the opportunities, but you'll rarely have a center back just thrown into the Premier League, especially at, the biggest clubs in England, like a Chelsea, City, or an Arsenal. I'd expect Marley Salmon's pathway to look like, okay, he's 15. Next year, he's going to play some under 18s and some under 21s. By the end of the year, if he's played well, he'll probably be one of the mainstays in the under 21s, and then to be reassessed from there. He's still, at 15, we talk about the worry of Max Dowman growing. Let's see how Marley Salmon's body changes. These are legitimate, kids. They're teenagers. There's a lot that's going to change about them in the next 18 months to 2 years. So I wouldn't expect to see Marley Salmon play for the Arsenal first team in the next 2 years, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't be someone we're excited about. And by 18, if he's made his debut, he's been way overachieving and super successful. But it is nice to see that Arsenal have put a little bit of a focus on defenders for the first time in a while in the academy. And it's not just Marley Salmon. There's some other exciting players as well that we will probably see a little bit more from this year, including Josh Onagaik and Sam Onyekachukwu, who are both very athletic, strong center backs. Onagaik can also play out on the left as well and very technically skilled. So Arsenal seemingly about 3-4 years ago put a lot more into developing young defenders, because that's always been a weakness of Hale End.
Yeah, well, finally, just to wrap up, you mentioned at the start of the show in the US, they start looking at talents from about 13 years onwards. We're starting to see that creep into the European game, where we're seeing comps of players. I saw a comp of Yamal, and I think he was 12. And that stuff, it's scary that is going around, and we talk about player protection and so on. These players are being platformed at such a level so early on that the whole world knows about them because of social media. It's very, very difficult to spot the newest emerging talents. Everyone's aware of them. Is there a danger that, firstly, the players are just completely ruined by the pressure of the outside world? And how do clubs protect that? And then I guess the final question is, are we seeing more and more of the US model of maximizing talent very early coming into European football, with the transfer fees just getting astronomical?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we're going to see in terms of the way players are talked about differently is clubs actually platforming players at a younger age rather than waiting to platform them, because I think clubs are worried about losing the ability to control the narrative around players, especially with, I saw a different Hale End account. I mean, I'm not trying to call anyone out, but post a comp of like a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old on Twitter the other day. And it doesn't really make sense to be doing that. Let's just be honest. These are truly children who are not really even in charge of their own day-to-day schedules. Like, we're not, out here, talking about how good they may or may not be in 10 years. That doesn't seem right. The U.S., it's a little bit different because, number one, high school sports is a highly attended thing. I mean, if you go to Texas, Friday night football is the biggest thing in the state, bigger than college and professional in a lot of areas, and it means everything. And it's not being monetized in that way. I mean, that's not what it's about. It's about the true element of the sport, whereas I think what we're losing in this age of social media for soccer, as you mentioned, is it's being used to monetize these players in a way that is probably not healthy for them at such a young age. And so back to what I was originally saying, I do expect clubs to try and own that narrative and own the way that, content is being distributed about younger players, so that they don't lose control of the way 13, 14, 15-year-olds are being spoken about, because they shouldn't be spoken about the way 19, 20, and 21-year-olds are being spoken about. It's definitely an interesting era because we're having more access to footage than we've ever had before, which is in a lot of ways great, because players will get opportunities that they never had before. There's so many good things about it. Players who would never be seen by a scout 5 countries away now maybe will have that opportunity. But at the same time, we do still need to protect the integrity of youth football. And I really implore people to, prevent from talking about players who are not at the very least playing under 18s football, where, the average person can at least find the highlights after any given game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great point and a really great place to leave the show. Massive thanks for coming on, giving us your time, giving us your knowledge and insight. Please tell everyone once again where they can find you, and I would highly recommend following Will.
Yeah, Adam, thanks so much. It was a lot of fun to be here. You can find me on Twitter at Will Balsam, my name, that's right there. And then if you're looking for more video analysis, that's a little bit more long-winded than what you can fit into a tweet, you can find me on TikTok and YouTube at HaleEndProductions, my old Twitter name. You should be able to find me there under those ats with match analysis on a day-by-day basis on TikTok and some bigger videos on YouTube. But Adam, it was a real pleasure, and hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great having you on. I'd love to have you on again. But please drop a like and subscribe on the channel, and please join us again for the next episode very soon. Have a great day, and we will see you again.